Okay, so we've started recording now. So I'm Brendan Ty, I'm the Erasmus and European Partnerships Manager in Trinity College Dublin. I'm joined today by Declan Riley, a Disability Officer in the Disability Service, Andrew Carr, an Activity Support in Academic Registry, and Alva Kelly, a student who's here for a panel discussion. And we'll begin today with a brief overview of the Erasmus programme and your options, then a talk from Declan on how the Disability Service can support you, and Alva will talk about her experience on Erasmus last year in Italy. And then we'll have a Q&A session. So if you do come up with questions, don't be afraid to submit them at any time during the presentation, and we can get to them towards the end. I'll try to allow everyone to unmute at the end, and then we can have a bit of a chat. There are enough of us, I think, for that to be manageable. So without much further ado, I'm going to share my screen and begin the presentation. But just so you're aware, a similar webinar is already available on the Study Abroad website, where you can have a look at the recording, and there are lots of students who joined that panel discussion, so you'll hear a lot more about going abroad from them if you want to take another look at that. Okay. Sorry. Okay, Andrew, can you just tell me if that's okay? Can everyone see the slides? Perfect. Okay, so let's begin. There are a couple of types of Erasmus that you can go on. There's a study abroad, which is the classic. You go to a partner university, you take modules there, and they count towards your degree here in Trinity. There's a traineeship, otherwise known as a work placement, or for some schools, they do research in a partner university. And that's usually where it's very similar basically to doing an internship. And then for some schools, it's a summer placement where you actually spend the summer doing a traineeship in general. And that's generally in health sciences, things like pharmacy, radiation therapy. In terms of the duration, it's quite flexible. You can go for either one semester or you could go for the full year. With regards to where you can go, our Erasmus network covers most of Europe, as you can see. We have partners in 22 countries across Europe and 180 partner universities. There's a little asterisk here beside Switzerland and the UK. Switzerland, because they're not officially in the Erasmus program, they're in a parallel program. So there is some funding available there. And the UK, the asterisk is there because for the moment, whether or not they're going to continue being in the Erasmus program remains to be determined. But for next year, so any mobilities that take place in the 2021-22 academic year will be covered by the Erasmus program. One thing you need to note though is that you can't actually go to every single one of these 180 partner universities. Almost all Erasmus exchanges are subject specific. So what we mean by that is that they're set up between a particular school or department here in Trinity and the equivalent at a partner university. So students are able to follow modules that are roughly the same at a partner university. That means that most schools or departments have on hand about like 10 or a dozen partnerships across Europe. And almost all subject areas do have these partnerships. So as long as your degree offers study abroad, you generally will have an Erasmus option. What's really important though is that you make sure that the universities you're interested in studying offer the right combination of subjects and are flexible enough to accommodate your pathway. So just to kind of explain what I mean by that is that if you're looking at the partnerships in economics and you do economics and history, then you'll have to make sure that the partner university you want to go to offers both of those subjects and that they actually allow you to study both of those subjects. Because some of the partner universities are very strict and they only let you study in one single department, whereas others will let you choose modules from all departments in the host university. Now moving on really quickly to the Erasmus Grant. So every student that goes on Erasmus, it doesn't matter about their nationality whatsoever, any student that goes on Erasmus is eligible for the Erasmus Grant. The amounts that you can receive per month vary depending on the cost of living in the host country. So you can see that the lowest amount is 300. It's 350 per month in some of the countries with a higher cost of living. And if you actually do an internship or a traineeship, you get €100 top up per month. So the money is definitely very useful. And if you consider that the cost of living in most of Europe is lower than in Ireland, you can actually spread this money and it goes quite far, especially if you're not going on Erasmus to one of the larger capital cities where the cost of living can be quite high. In terms of your budget and what you need to be considering, we urge you very strongly to take into account health and travel insurance. I think the need for health insurance has become very clear. Obviously, there is the European Health Insurance Card that provides basic cover, but we encourage all students to get health insurance when they go abroad because the level of cover is just better. And as students, you have very reduced rates. Travel insurance is always very useful anytime you leave the country. So if you have cancelled flights or lost baggage, that kind of thing, or your flight is delayed, it's very useful and you'll probably be doing a bit more traveling on an Erasmus year. We'll talk about that in a bit. So you need to kind of think of these things when you're looking at your budget. And bear in mind then that some of the countries that students go to, for instance, France, they're quite generous with students and they have rent allowance that students get. And, you know, it's not just the Erasmus grant that you're eligible to look for funding from. And as we mentioned, the Swiss universities aren't technically in the Erasmus program. They're in the Swiss European Mobility Program, or STEMP. But the funding is roughly the same and it's a similar kind of process. So that's why it's administered by the Erasmus team. So there are extra supports, and you'll be finding out a lot about that today. So students that are registered with the Disability Service are eligible for extra financial support to cover the associated costs that they would incur when they choose to go abroad. And that might be for somebody to accompany them over in their move to the host country, or it may be for somebody to help them with note taking, or it could be somebody to provide assistance maybe once a week to come in and help clean their apartment, or it could be for a particular piece of equipment that the host university can't provide. Obviously, host universities as well do have similar services as Trinity does with the disability service. So it's really important that you contact your disability officer early on to look into these supports that are on offer at the host university. And I think everybody here on this call would agree that earlier you do this, the better. But it is your responsibility to disclose your disability to relevant parties. That includes myself and Andrew in the Erasmus team and your Erasmus coordinators in each school and department, so that they can help you with this information gathering. For those of you who are actually in receipt of the SUSI grant as well, you should bear in mind that your SUSI grant is maintained while you go on Erasmus. So you can take your SUSI funding and, sorry, I'm getting a Teams call. I just have to, oh, sorry, Audrey, I'm on a call. I'm sorry, I have to go. Sorry about that, everyone. I thought I had that blocked. So your SUSI grant is still available while on Erasmus, and you get €120 as a top up in certain circumstances, mainly if your degree requires you to go abroad. So almost all students are eligible to go abroad, as we discussed. Certain schools do have a minimum grade requirement, and this is 2-1 for certain schools, but for the majority of schools, it's a 2-2. The 2-1 would usually be for schools where the partner universities are very, very highly ranked in certain subjects, let's say for economics, and they think that if they send over students with a 2-2, they might struggle too much and actually fail to obtain credits to bring home. Your schools that you study with here in Trinity are the ones that decide the destinations where you go. So it's not myself and Andrew in the central Erasmus team. It's each school and department will kind of have their own application procedure, and they will work with each student to try and get them their most preferred destination. You do have to pay Trinity registration fees when you go abroad. So you're still registered as a Trinity student. That means you have access to certain things like your personal tutor, obviously, as well as student counselling while you're abroad, but you don't have to pay any tuition fees to the partner university. Tuition fees at the partner university are waived, but there may be some small charges for certain things like student levies. That could be for access to their sports facilities or to join their students' union, which is useful. A lot of students, I think, when they're considering going on Erasmus, look at language as a real barrier, but you should be aware that many partner universities across Europe do actually teach in English. Obviously, they also teach in their native language, but we have more and more partners that are offering teaching in English. So language isn't actually a huge barrier. The Nordic countries in particular, as well as the Netherlands and Malta, are really ahead of the curve on this, and they have almost all of their teaching offered in English. And last year, interestingly enough, 60% of students that went on Erasmus weren't language students. So it really isn't something that should stop you. You'll be able to find somewhere that offers teaching in English for your course. There is actually the option as well, if you are going on exchange, to learn the language of the host country, and the Erasmus program actually assists you with this and offers online linguistic support. It is mandatory to take the placement tests at the start and the end so that they can show that your language progressed, but it's really a tool that's there, and you can make as much use of it as you like or as little as you like. So in terms of the next steps, right now it's all about gathering information. So speaking to your school coordinators, the Erasmus coordinator in each school or department that you study in, looking into the options available and asking your schools about how to apply. So it's not a centralized application that's done through academic registry, it's done in your school or department. And then in the new year, you'd hear from your school about where they have decided that you should go. Then you'll be asked to complete some forms so that people in academic registry know where to nominate you for. And then we send off your application to the host university, who then has to agree that you can study with them. Later, so we generally in May or June, you'll be organizing your grant documentation. There is a little bit more for you to do if you want to look into the supplementary funding from the HEA and so on. But the Erasmus team, myself and Andrew, will be able to assist with that, as will the Disability Service. And we really recommend that you attend pre-departure meetings and so on, so that you can prepare yourself for living abroad and so on, and then start to look for accommodation at the host university. So as we said, right now, you should be looking at gathering all the information you can, researching your options, and speaking to as many people as you can about going abroad. When you're coming back from your Erasmus, you should be aware that you need to obviously obtain credit. So 60 credits is a normal year abroad, 30 credits is a semester, but you're actually only assessed on your best 45 credits or 20 credits if you go for one semester. To make sure that you're following appropriate courses when you're abroad, there's a learning agreement that's in place, and it ensures that the academic coordinator here in Trinity approves the modules that you take over there. Don't register for anything without their approval, but they will also have to make sure that you're taking the correct amount of courses in line with your pathway. So whether you're major, minor, or if you've got a new minor subject, that kind of thing. And then they sign the learning agreement before you begin your exchange. But you really should be aware as well that in Europe, not all universities have an add and drop session. So some universities do not allow you to change your courses once you've signed up. So you really have to check all the rules and regulations when you're signing up for your classes. It is important, obviously, to study, but it is important as well to make the most of the experience when you're there. Contact hours are generally higher in Europe, but you should still have the time to do some exploring and get to know the city and the country, or even the continent during your time there. Again, when you're abroad, you're still a Trinity student, so supports and services are still provided. You have your tutor and your academic coordinators, but you also have student counselling and mentors and so on for going abroad. So we definitely recommend that you keep in touch with people when you're away. And this year more than ever, we are really encouraging that because of the situation across Europe with the pandemic. So if you do have any other questions on Erasmus, just reach out to erasmus@tcd.ie. But I'm going to wrap it up there for now and let Declan move on with his part.
Hi there, guys. I'm just going to share my screen with you now. Okay. Can you see that, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, so just following on then from what Brendan was talking about, I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on the specifics of disclosing a disability and seeking supports from the host university. I'm going to give a little bit of background really on what the key issues are for outgoing students and also for incoming students. So we do have a process of supports which kind of starts anytime in the first semester really for applicants thinking of going away the following year. So the process of supports are in line with the application phases of Erasmus. And as Brendan said, there is funding available to Erasmus Plus, which is administered by the HEA. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that as well. So I suppose from our point of view, and at times, maybe experiencing it with students as well, trying to find out what's available, there is a kind of a lack of insight on accessibility and supports available in host universities. So that lack of insight is on our part. There's a lot more we need to, as Brendan said, that there's 180 institutions. So we have a bit of work to do on getting much more information on accessibility. And that's something that we're tasked with this year through getting feedback from students who've been before, but also contacting the host universities and getting a better sense of the accessibility there. So that is one challenge we're aware of and we want to try and address. In principle, though, there is additional supports available for students with disabilities when studying abroad. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that as well. So it's really just around, as other people have said already, planning, a bit of preparation and thinking in advance. And then the practical side of it is the funding aspects and availing of the supports while you're actually there. And then on the other side, then incoming students, and this follows to you as traveling abroad from the host university's point of view. They follow the same rules and regulations that we follow in terms of European law and access to reasonable accommodations. So students can avail of additional funding through their home university, and the same supports are available to all students while at Trinity. So one of the issues that does crop up, though, is that visiting students can miss out on advanced supports and information. So at times there's less time to prepare and adjust, and so that might be, that could be your experience if you're arriving only a few days or a week before in your host university, whereas the students there already may have had a chance to visit the university several times in advance, go to open days, that sort of thing. So just looking at data from the last couple of years, we've had, since in the year 2018-19, we had 42 students disclose the disability or make us aware that they had a disability if they were traveling on Erasmus. And that was data that was provided by the staff in academic registry. The number of students who tend to apply for the additional funding for disability can be quite low. In one particular year, I don't think we had anybody applying for it, but that has changed. It can increase. We've had several students apply for it, I think last year. So we had 13 visiting students applied to the disability service in 2017 and 2018, and then 16 students in 2018. And then last year we had 3 students apply with the Erasmus Plus funding. for visiting abroad last year, 1920. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. So
Sorry,
on our
Declan,
website, yeah.
Can I interrupt? I'm not sure if I'm the only one, but I can only see the title slide of your presentation. I'm not seeing when you switch slides.
Oh, okay. I'm sharing my screen here, and I'm going through the slides. So I can't see the title slide now. Let's see if I go back here, title slide. Okay, so that's the title slide. Does that make any difference?
Not for me. I see Alva shaking her head as well.
Okay, let's see, display settings.
If you, yes, that's better.
Well, that's working, is it?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, so most of this information is on our website anyway, under students supports. So if students are applying through the Erasmus office this year, they have the opportunity to disclose that they have a disability, and then formally we contact all of those students and engage with them on a process of giving them advance notice of the supports available. So this is to give you an idea of what that's involved in. So we have information on our website about this, and then the Erasmus website has information there, and it's built into the application process. So you should be advised as you're going through the process, you have the opportunity to disclose internally in the application process. And for example, on our website, we give information about the Erasmus Plus funding, and we provide a checklist on things that you should do in advance of going abroad. Now, what we do is we encourage people to think about these things in advance, and certainly to have contacted us before the academic year is over in June. Now, we appreciate that a lot of students, consider applying for Erasmus and maybe decide to either leave it late to apply or leave it late to disclose that they have a disability when they're applying. But often what happens is students only contact us the week or two before they actually are due to travel abroad in August or September. And then they start looking for disclosures at that stage and supports in their host university and inquire about funding. And as you know, August is a very, very busy time of year for all universities. So there's far less time available to provide that level of support in August and September compared to in advance at the end of the previous year. So we would encourage students to disclose certainly in semester 2 and certainly before the end of June, so that we have time to help students prepare. And just in relation to what the additional funding, as well as the Erasmus grants that are available to everybody, and there is additional funding available through the HEA for students who incur any additional costs because of studying with a disability abroad. So just to give you an idea of what that is, it doesn't include things that you might be paying for anyway. Let's say, for example, like the cost of medications, which you would have to pay for regardless of where you might be studying. But it would include any types of supports that would be incurred because you're traveling abroad. So one of the things that's mentioned was an assistant to travel with you to assist you in moving over and settling in. That's an eligible expense. The cost of additional accommodation, if accommodation is needed, accessible accommodation is needed, and that's going to cost more, a contribution can be made to make up the difference of that. The transporting of specialist equipment is fundable, and also funding towards travel assistance if additional travel might be needed. So the way the HEA application works is you put in a best guess as to what you might need, and if it's approved, then those expenses will be reimbursed to you at the end of the year. So you have to keep receipts for any additional costs that you have a pre-approval for, and usually that's estimated. There's an estimate given. So let's say there was at a cost of €500 or €1,000. If you have receipts up to those amounts, then those amounts will be reimbursed to you at the end of the year. So the application for Erasmus Plus does work on a reimbursement phase. The money's not given to you in advance. you have to spend the money first and then keep the receipts and submit it for reimbursement at the end. So something that we would go through with you would be in relation to preparing to travel. It would be looking at the available information through your own course and through the website around what countries to go to and what host universities you can travel to, contacting the host university. We would assist you doing that. If you needed help with that, we can certainly do that. We do have some contacts in host universities with offices similar to the Disability Service. We don't have them with all of the host universities, and we can certainly assist you reach out and disclose and make inquiries in advance to host universities. And so it would be things like maybe communicating your LEND report, if required, providing them with the relevant documentation and getting clarity on what supports they can provide for you, similar to what you might get in Trinity, if they can provide the same or similar level of supports over there. So that's something we will assist you do. And as much as possible, we would like you to do those things yourself. But if you do need assistance or guidance on doing that, we'll certainly help you. The other parts of it really are, meeting in advance to discuss any additional supports that you might need. So, for example, if there's any eligibility needed for the funding, any complications around what might you need to travel with, or who might be able to travel with you, or what sort of supports might be available, how to disclose to the university and who to disclose to. Those are the things that we can discuss with you in advance. So certainly we have a checklist here. We'd encourage you to go through that. And when you've had a look at it and you've considered, what your country options and what your host university options are, you can certainly arrange to meet with your disability officer and talk through any of the issues that you feel you need to identify and discuss, whether they be funding or additional supports while you're there. So something that we do provide support with, as Brennan said, we do provide support for students while they're away. But in planning to go as well, it's important to consider how managing your study and your health, or you're managing any disability issues you may have, how that might be impacted by traveling abroad. And that's something you can plan for in advance and also put arrangements in place for supports while you're abroad. So even things like, if your health insurance, if you need to get your health insurance covered, what does it cover? Key contacts to contact over certain issues, whether you should be contacting the Disability Service or your tutor or another area. It's a good idea to have these things pre-identified and not be relying on researching them at the time. If you need to contact somebody urgently, you need to have a kind of a go-to place where you've pre-identified the name and the contact details of the relevant person to contact. So it just makes it quicker. I would point out as well that increasingly students have been starting to share their experiences of studying abroad, and on our website here, on the 5th point here, we have Amy Hassett, who studied abroad, and she has written a short article in the Ahead Journal on her experience of studying abroad. And Alva Kelly, who's about to speak next, she has done a video with colleagues in the Ability Co-op on her experiences of studying abroad. And she's about to speak now in a few minutes. I won't say any more about it, but afterwards you can review this video here as well. So I'm going to finish up here, but just to summarize, to say that at any point through the process of the application, please do contact us and use the resources available through Academic Registry, through your course, or through ourselves to get guidance and assistance on your application and any questions you might have. I'm going to stop the screen share there.
Thanks, Declan. So over to you, Alva.
I'll just share my screen now. Can everyone see?
Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. So my name is Alva Kelly and I'm a final year European Studies student. So I did my Erasmus in Milan last year, and I'm just gonna, I suppose, speak a little bit about the perspective from a student of navigating Erasmus with a disability. I have a physical disability, so I use a manual wheelchair, but I'm gonna try and speak kind of generally, so the advice should hopefully apply to you no matter what disability you have. Um, so firstly, for kind of this stage in the year before you go on Erasmus, or if you're thinking about going on Erasmus, I'd really recommend just trying to be organized about it. Meet with your disability officer, contact the Erasmus coordinator and any relevant people within your department. Just to say you'd like to go on Erasmus, you're thinking about going on Erasmus, you have a disability, and then you can discuss what your needs and requirements are, what the best option will be for you. And it just means you have plenty of time to make sure it's a smooth process and you get the most suitable university and country for your needs. I'd also recommend contacting the disability service at your prospective host university or at a few different universities that you're considering. So for me, when I met with Declan, my disability officer, and after we'd spoken about the different options, he emailed a couple of different universities for me, just stating what my requirements were, asking if they had an Erasmus student with a disability before. And then you can see from the responses you get back if they're able to accommodate you, how well they'll be able to accommodate you. And it just means you can make a more informed decision. And then another one, which I think is particularly useful considering the pandemic and you can't really travel. If you want to see what the city is like, if you have particular accessibility requirements, use Google Maps. You can go on and virtually walk around the city. And for me, I wanted to see if there were a lot of steps, if there was a lot of cobblestones, and that was actually a really handy way of doing it without having to actually get on a plane and go and see what it was like in person. So then you've already heard a lot about the extra funding you can receive. So I was eligible for this funding, and basically how it worked was Declan informed me that this was an option I could apply, and I worked on the application with him and with staff from the Erasmus office to ensure that we had all the relevant information there and it was filled out correctly. The form becomes available, I think, during the second term usually. So then I submitted it in July and I heard back quite quickly that I was eligible for the funding. Just to give you some examples, what I used the funding for was to have someone travel with me to help me to carry my bags and things like that, and to help me travel over to Milan. I also was able to use it for if public transport wasn't accessible. So in Milan, some of the metro stations have elevators, some of them don't. Some of the tram lines were accessible, some of them weren't. So if I needed to go somewhere and the public transport wasn't suitable, I could get a taxi, keep the receipt, and then send that off to be reimbursed. And then the final thing that I used the supplemental funding for was actually while I was away, I was finding cobblestones were a bit of a problem for me with my wheelchair. So I was able to purchase an extra piece of equipment that attached onto the front of my chair to just make it easier to wheel over cobblestones. And then I was able to send the receipt back to Andrew in the Erasmus office, and I was able to be reimbursed for that. But you can use it for so many different things, as you've already heard. If you need a carer or a note taker or different things like that, it's obviously done on a case-by-case basis. And then obviously remember, even if you're not eligible for the funding, that everyone gets the grant, which is really useful. So then while you're on Erasmus, I would recommend when you arrive to arrange to meet with the disability service at your host university. So the first day I arrived, I met with the staff in the Erasmus office, and they arranged for me to meet with the disability service the next day. And it just meant I could introduce myself. They were aware that I was there. They were aware of what I needed. And we sat down and went through my timetable to make sure that all of the classrooms were suitable. And they gave me a contact number so that if I had any problems, I could ring them. So it's really handy. I would also say just don't be afraid to ask for help. That's what people are there for, the Erasmus office at your host university, the disability service at your host university, but also your Erasmus coordinator, the Erasmus office in Trinity, and the disability service in Trinity. Don't feel like you have to kind of do it all by yourself. And also just don't be afraid if at the beginning it's a bit challenging and it takes some time to settle in. Whether you have a disability or not, everyone on their first few weeks of Erasmus will be a bit overwhelmed. You know, you've moved to a new country, it's challenging for everyone. So just give yourself some time to settle in. And then, yeah, I suppose just all of these kind of things aside, it's a really great experience, and it's an amazing way to meet new people, to make friends, make memories, travel around the country, and even around Europe. Those are just photos of students I met from loads of different countries, and then photos with a girl who's also in Trinity, but she was studying in Rome. So hopefully by the time any of you are doing Erasmus, you'll be able to travel around a bit more. And yeah, I think that's everything really. If you have any questions that you just don't think of today or that you want to ask privately, my email is there. So I'd be happy to answer any of those questions. And I hope that you all decide to go on Erasmus and have a great time.
Thank you, Alva. So we now have lots of time if anybody wants to submit questions either through the Q&A or using the raise your hand function on Zoom. We can come to you that way, and you can, we'll allow your microphone to be turned on. So please fire away with any questions you might have for myself, Declan, Andrew, or Alva. There are none. I guess that means that we have absolutely everything covered, which is a really good sign. I have probably one question then maybe for Alva. So Alva, you were on exchange when the pandemic hit, and how do you think that that affected everything? Because we've heard like from a lot of students that even though it was a very unique time, that it didn't in any way kind of like take away from their choice to go abroad?
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously because it was sort of all happening for the first time when we were away, it was a strange experience, but we were able to continue everything online. I was doing my classes through Italian because I do European studies, so it was good anyway just to be able to continue my classes through Italian. But also, you know, you still gain a lot from studying at a different university, whether it's online or not. So I would recommend to go for it anyway. And I think especially at this stage in the pandemic where people kind of know a bit more how to handle it, there's restrictions in place, but you're still able to do things in different countries. So I think at this stage, hopefully for people who want to go on Erasmus next year, you can still go and you know what to expect. And you know, if there's a pandemic, it's gonna be in Ireland, it's gonna be in Europe, so you might as well be experiencing something new while it's happening, I think. It didn't, I wouldn't have changed anything. I would absolutely still have done the Erasmus if I knew there was gonna be the pandemic.
That's actually a really good point you raise. I think 2 points. So the benefits of study abroad, they aren't necessarily something that we spoke about a lot today. I think, as we mentioned before, there's the previous webinar that you can take a look at, where there are lots of students talking about the benefits of study abroad. Louise Staunton, the International Student Experience Manager, also talks a lot about the benefits, how it increases your employability and so on for later in life. So please do take a look there if you have kind of questions about why study abroad. But in terms of the pandemic, as you say, it's affecting us all, and our students were checking in with them on a fortnightly basis, and they're mainly reporting back that they're having a good time, all things considered. So I see here in the chat that somebody is just saying that they have to go. So I guess if there are no other questions, then we'll wrap it up here. Maybe just to summarize, if you have questions, reach out to erasmus@tcd.ie or the Disability Service, or Alva very kindly offered her to let you contact her privately. So please don't hesitate. We're here to point you in the right direction, or point you towards information sources, and help any way we can. So thanks for your time, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, Brendan.